Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a real sleazy one when I put Paul Schrader's Hardcore against Joel Schumacher's 8 millimeter. And this one was a rough one to get through, man, because they really put you in a den of hell and sleaze and all that shit. So let's just dive right on into the first one. We have Paul Schrader's Hardcore, which stars George C. Scott, who George C. Scott, one of the greatest actors of all time, and he can really make a mid movie seem great. And so he definitely does that here. We see him as this like deeply religious Midwestern businessman from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and his daughter goes on a trip to L.A. and she decides, oh fuck that shit, I'm staying in L.A. She runs away. She didn't want to deal with the strict bullshit, so in desperation, he hires a private detective played by Peter Boyle, who plays it brilliantly. Like Peter Boyle's that might be the best part of the movie. Not near enough Peter Boyle in the film, because it gets to the point where if George C. Scott's character feels like he's not getting results enough, so he decides to take matters into his own hands, goes to L.A., goes undercover as a porn producer trying to find the guy that's in the film banging his daughter, which that's one of the most fucked up scenes when Peter Boyle shows George C. Scott the porn film that has his daughter in it, and it's doesn't even warn him either. That just shows like how great of an actor George C. Scott is when you see the anguish on his face as he's having to watch this film. It's like I said, the movie itself is very sleazy and fucked up. There are some funny moments too. The fucking audition sequence where where he's faking the auditions and shit, and Big Dick Black is one of the most funny things in the film. And they Jism Jim, he knocks him upside the head with the lamp, because that turns out to be the dude that was fucking his daughter in the film. And very professional when it comes to porn. These guys, they take their porn seriously, and and that's one thing that's kind of poked fun of in the film, and it's almost like the film is done through George C. Scott's eyes. It was also a way for Paul Schrader to kind of examine his strict Calvinist upbringing and stuff. But then he keep dead end after dead end, because like nobody's talking in this scene, especially when you look like a cop the way that George C. Scott does. And he ends up getting help from this sex worker played by Susan Hubley, who helps him try to find his daughter, because she knows these people. And it becomes a weird kind of dynamic, because like in a way she kind of becomes his adopted daughter. She kind of helps him figure shit out and stuff, but of course he's a fucking asshole, and he doesn't want to like really bond with her and stuff, even though like she's trying to bond with him in a way. And then Peter Boyle comes back in the end to help him out. There's a shootout at the end. It's very quick, because there's this subplot of this Rattan guy who's doing snuff films, which snuff films in and of themselves are an urban legend. And so it's like, then it creates a drama that's not really there. This dude gets shot down in the streets, dead in front of a porn theater, and then they have a reconciliation. George C. Scott and his daughter in the film, they have a sort of, it's kind of bullshit. She starts out all edgy, fuck you, I don't want to come back with you and all this shit. And then he just breaks down and cries and all this shit. And all of a sudden, she's like, no, I really want to come back and all this shit, which is such a forced, tacked on ending. If you really wanted to make a movie that was unsettling, maybe she just goes her own way. Or if you're going to do the tacky, corny fucking ending, then do something along the lines of like, maybe he takes the Susan Hubley character home with him too, instead of just leaving her high and dry. He could start a home for reformed hoes and shit, instead of, just being an asshole. Now like he's the Susan Hubley character, she's left to deal with her old man who's out to get her and shit, who's probably gonna kill her, cut up her face or some shit, so if he really wants to save people, but he really only cares about his daughter, it's all just, pride bullshit and stuff. So, and we move forward to 8 millimeter, where we see Nicolas Cage as a private detective, and in a way he's kind of a mixture of the George C. Scott character and the Peter Boyle character in Hardcore. And here he's hired to investigate a case. This rich woman finds a snuff film in her husband's vault after he dies, and she hires Nicolas Cage to figure out where it came from. And he's not entirely sure that it's real, but when he's watching it, you can tell it looks pretty fucking real. You see the disgust is plainly on his face. And because this guy, he's pretty straight laced for a detective. He's definitely got a code of ethics and morals, and he's got a wife and kid. His wife is played by Catherine Keener, and he goes through all this stuff, trying to find, and he's going nowhere. He ends up in L.A., where he ends up befriending a sex shop worker played by Joaquin Phoenix, who essentially serves the same purpose as Season Hubley's character in Hardcore. He's there to navigate Nicolas Cage through this sick, fucked up world of porn. And much like how Hardcore was one man's descent into hell, they take it a lot further in 8mm. Like, Joaquin really shows Nicolas Cage's character like all like the seediest side of American life, and just the underbelly of, like, the junkies for the hard stuff, as he calls them in the film. And it's got a way better cast too, because Peter Stormare plays the director, who's all into the bondage shit. Does like real artsy bondage stuff that people love. And James Gandolfini plays a porn director, a real sleazy guy, and he's real good at playing that kind of shit. And there's when the showdown finally happens, it's fucking intense. It gets turns out the lawyer was in on it the whole time. And the thing about it is, what makes this movie more shocking to me is just how nonchalant these people are about it. It's like, and it's not even anything sinister. It's just that they like to do it. They're just sickos. And when Nicolas Cage confronts the lawyer, he's like, well, why did he do it? And he's all like, well, because he could. And that's one thing. I guess it's kind of an attack on the super rich. Is like, you have the ability to do something, you're gonna do it. You got enough money, and which to me is more chilling than any other thing. That fucking sleazy pimps or anything that they show in Hardcore, like sick porn directors. These motherfuckers are the sickest. And and of course the film written by the same guy that wrote Seven, and it's definitely on that level of sleaze, and they clearly understand more on how to make the type of film that they're making. Whereas like Paul Schrader with Hardcore, he didn't really understand. He tried to make art house exploitation films, and he respect the art house shit, but he didn't really respect the exploitation shit. So if you're going to try to do both lanes, you got to respect both lanes. And Joel Schumacher clearly respects both lanes in this film, and he definitely like takes it further, because it gets to that point where like Nicolas Cage, there's a little Mexican standoff in the fucking porn place where they're gonna shoot the snuff film and shit, and then at the end he's just like, these animals don't deserve to live. When he finds out they actually killed the girl, he fucking kills all of them, and then when the guy that plays the machine that has the mask in the film, when that shit's revealed, just a nerdy white dude, and his whole like monologue, kind of sensationalized there, but it's like, oh, it wasn't anything bad, I just like to do this shit. I didn't have a bad childhood, mommy didn't beat me, all this kind of shit. And to me that's just more chilling. But just the fact you see this man just like lose his shit, it's more of a Paul Schrader film than Hardcore, because guy just fucking kills them all. And then he ends up going back to his wife and kid, and kind of having, he's back in the normal life after he's rid the world of evil, so to speak. The movie's not as heavy handed as I'm making it out to be, but this round's clearly got to go to 8mm. 90s get this round. For anybody keeping score, that's 32-27. The 70s are still up by 5. But the 90s, man, like I said, they'll come back here and there, man. Like shit like this, where like the 70s, they tried to push shit a lot further. Sometimes they fell short, and they definitely fell short with Hardcore. I think in the hands of a better director, like nobody's disputing that Paul Schrader is a great writer, but as a director, it's very questionable. In the hands of like somebody like maybe like a John Flynn or somebody, this movie could have been a lot better. Whereas like, the hack journeyman, because like Joel Schumacher in a way can be considered a journeyman, more, especially more so than Paul Schrader. I don't think Schumacher wrote very many of his actual films, whereas like Paul Schrader is one of those writer directors. It may even be the worst of like the directors who started out writing, especially writing about film. You get kind of so into like film, like, well, this is how film's supposed to be, that you kind of don't understand how film should be. you know, if that makes any fucking sense. But and plus, even though George C. Scott may be a better actor than Nicolas Cage, they go a lot further and they don't try to be as douchey with it. It's a pretty much just a fucking descent into hell that you cannot escape from, and that to me is fucking insane. So 32-27, 70 still up by 5. And, like I said, if I said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. Any suggestions, I'm open to those. I got a lot of these, as you see these bonus rounds pop up, because I got to know. The main events happen on Saturday, of course, and the next one will be Welcome to LA versus Magnolia. And so, real sleazy world out there. And, when the movies can sensationalize it and shit, but there's a way of doing it that you're not judgmental. You let the audience decide for yourself how fucked up shit should be. They're not, because that's the thing, is like the disgust on Nicolas Cage's face tells more than anything that George C. Scott did. Just he not a real like unhinged Nicolas Cage performance. Very refined. For this, especially this sort of film and the kind of characters that Nicolas Cage would play. So the world is hell.